when I was the young mayor of Cleveland. And at that point, I don't have to tell you what the climate was like in America 40 years ago, but my administration, as mayor of Cleveland, had a policy that said that people have a right to be who they are, and we made sure there was no discrimination based on sexual orientation, and we had an inclusive administration. This was 40 years ago. Years later, when I was a candidate for the state senate, and then later on a member of the United States Congress, I had the chance in Congress to lead the way on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. If anyone ever passed by my office, the first thing they would see was a sign with a blue field and an equal sign on that blue field. That was the first thing they'd see. So the message would be loud and clear as to what the office stood for, equality of all people. As a presidential candidate in 2003, we're talking 15 years ago, I was the first person in that campaign, and in some ways for many years on the national scene, to stand for marriage equality.
Right.
And so with that as an understanding, I want to share with you this enunciation of a platform. Now, this might take 10 minutes, but I hope that you'll feel that it's well spent. And after that, I'm certainly open to any questions that you may have. And for this occasion, I have a pair of glasses that matches my tie.
Awesome. Yeah.
I appreciate that. 99 cents. A low budget campaign. So the expression of gender and sexuality is as beautiful as it is complex. Human sexuality and gender identity do not fall into neat binary categories that can be strictly defined. They are a mix of biology and psychology, childhood development and family nurture, social experience and spiritual beliefs, love and desire, culture and politics, even race and class. The long arc of the modern LGBTQ civil rights movement, born out of the underground formations of the Madison Society and the Daughters of Abilities, evolved in the 1950s, galvanized in the 1960s, organized in the 1970s, mobilized in the 1980s, advanced in the 1990s, amplified in the 2000s, and finally achieved growing acceptance in the last few years of the current decade. In recent years, the LGBTQ community has made stunning accomplishments: marriage equality, the ability to serve in the military, the promise of eradicating HIV and AIDS within the next 20 to 30 years, and an emerging generation that doesn't hold antipathy towards the LGBT community. And I think one of the things we have to recognize is the generational change that has taken place in this country.
Absolutely.
The young people who are so enlightened and who are determined to, in their own lives, stand for inclusiveness. The culture that stemmed from the civil rights movement for LGBTQ equality weaves a tapestry of diversity and creativity. It is a community to be admired for its struggles and accomplishments. However, despite giant steps forward, we still live in a world where the LGBTQ community faces discrimination and alienation, often suffering violence and depression, and is disproportionately susceptible to suicide. In our current political climate, the ignorance of government officials who lack compassion, a resurgence of homophobia and transphobia is emerging. It is still possible in many places to be married on Saturday and fired on Monday. It is still possible in many places to be denied access to housing. Bathroom laws have been brought forward. Progress is under attack. It is often argued that the LGBTQ community seeks laws and policies that seek special rights, but actually it's about protecting basic human dignity.
That's right.
It's not about asking for more rights or special privileges. It's about ensuring that the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ Ohioans, enjoy the dignity due all human beings as their birthright.
Right.
The Kucinich Samples ticket for governor and lieutenant governor commits that there shall be no laws in this state which promote the oppression or demean the dignity of the LGBTQ community. Where such laws exist, we will work to strike them down, often by executive order or by bringing forth judicial challenges or legislative action. We also commit to seek out deficiencies in Ohio laws that keep the LGBTQ community at a disadvantage. We shall lead with policy. And now I want to be quite specific in the areas that we intend to lead on, beginning with equal rights and protections for all. Family is the bedrock of society. Families exist to create the bonds and social networks we rely on. Every human being wants to be part of a family. The LGBTQ community has won many battles recently, making it much easier for same-sex families to adopt children and to have the right to marry. We commit to protect the hard-won rights of the LGBTQ community and to fight for the protections not yet in place, protections that create fairness and help support families with respect to equal protections. Tara Samples and I support the statewide LGBTQ non-discrimination protections currently proposed in the Ohio General Assembly. We're talking about Senate Bill 100 and House Bill 160. The legislation adds sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of protected groups as referenced in multiple provisions of the Ohio Revised Code. This will create protections against discrimination in employment, housing, and so on. We support We support adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the hate crimes legislation defined as ethnic intimidation, found in 27.12 of the Ohio Revised Code. This provision is not currently included in SB 100 or HB 160. We support lowering the burden of proof for hate crimes qualification to increase its effectiveness as a deterrent from bullying and targeting based on sexual orientation or gender identity. We oppose so-called religious freedom legislation, such as the Religious Freedom Restoration Act passed in Indiana in 2015. These types of legislative maneuvers are becoming more prevalent in the United States. I want to make it clear that Tara Samples and I will never legalize homophobia or transphobia.
Yes, all right.
With respect to LGBTQ youth support and intervention, LGBTQ youth are particularly vulnerable. Unabated bullying and isolation at school, disapproval and rejection from home, alienation and ostracization from faith communities are still serious problems which LGBTQ youth face. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth ages 10 to 24, and LGBTQ youth are 2 or 3 times more likely to commit suicide than their heterosexual peers. We commit to protect and support our LGBTQ Ohio youth with health programs, mental health counseling, and support at every level to make sure young people are given the love and support they need to be able to move through life. This is essential.
It is.
And a state government, if it does anything, has to protect young people and make sure that they feel important and valued and protected. And we will do that.
Excellent.
Now, we have heard a lot of discussion about conversion therapy. I want to be very specific about this. Conversion therapy is torture by definition of the Geneva Convention standards. It has become a major contributor to the LGBTQ youth suicide epidemic. For the youth who are forced into such programs against their will, this is by definition, in my view, child abuse.
It is.
Which cannot and will not be tolerated under a Kucinich Samples administration. We support a statewide ban on conversion therapy in the mental health profession that is currently proposed in the Ohio Senate, SB 126.
Okay.
I'll make sure I got that right. Yes. We support a total ban on conversion therapy in Ohio for both licensed and unlicensed providers. We do not feel that SB 126 is sufficient to abate the problem. This legislation only covers the mental health profession. The mental health profession has disqualified conversion therapy as legitimate. Now let's talk about bullying, which is a major problem for LGBTQ youth. It's often left intentionally unnoticed by school administrations, faculty, and staff. It is a given that the stress and anxiety caused by school bullying contributes to suicide.
Right.
This is unacceptable, and it has to stop. So we are, Tara Samples and I, support statewide standards for how schools intervene in situations where a bully is targeting an LGBTQ youth. We support the discipline of officials of school districts and their agents who do not comply with high standards in this regard. We support properly handling young bullies, including commensurate academic penalties, counseling, and diversity education.
Awesome. That's
We
perfect.
support programs and services with a special focus on LGBTQ suicide prevention and care. Additionally, LGBTQ youth are disproportionately much likely to be homeless than their peers. And LGBTQ youth are roughly 7% of the total youth population and yet they make up about 40% of all homeless youth. We need to think about that for a moment, about the stigma that young people feel. We have to lead the way to a state which prizes inclusiveness, diversity, celebrates it, not puts any sanctions on it.
Yeah.
And Tara Samples and I intend to lead the way in that regard. We support programs for families having difficulty coping with the discovery of their child's sexual orientation or gender identity, and such that would be aimed at finding acceptance and holding families together to minimize the number of runaways who end up in the streets. We support programs that take care of the displaced LGBTQ youth, offering health care, food, shelter, and education, while focusing on placing kids in loving homes. And because if they can't be reunited with the families that are their birth families. I want now to speak about transgender and protections for those who are transgendered or intersex. Gender minorities, including transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming individuals, are probably the most misunderstood group outside the larger LGBTQ community. Societal ignorance, familial alienation, and social isolation are common. Such oppressed individuals are often unemployed and have a difficult time finding access to health care that is sensitive to their trans-specific needs. They're often turned away from housing, making it difficult to find a place to live on all too often limited incomes. Because of society's difficulty and acceptance with gender differences, those in the trans community are at an increased risk of becoming victims of violence and death due to hate crimes. Tara Samples and I commit to protect and support our transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming Ohioans. We support efforts to bring better awareness to the struggles faced by gender minorities. We oppose the common rule that advises parents to select a gender for an intersex child by the time he or she is 18 months. We oppose the cosmetic alteration of intersex children's genitalia. Ambiguous genitalia is not dysfunctional genitalia, and scar tissue deadens the nerves, which pose long-term negative effects on the sexual lives and intimate relationships of intersex people as they become adults. We support allowing intersex children to make their own decisions about their gender identity and to make decisions regarding their physical expression in society when they can legitimately give informed consent. We support the creation of programs that provide social workers to parents of intersex children to allow a gender-ambiguous baby to grow into the gender that best fits the child. We support the creation of childhood, transgender, and intersex transition assistance programs that help educate families, assist parents with medical care and counseling, and seek to help transgender and intersex children transition. We support moving away from a dysphoria model of mental health that frames non-normative gender expression as part of a disorder and move toward transformative mental health models that emphasize self-determination and self-care. We oppose bathroom laws and any other legislation that targets transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex people to demean their character and deny them basic civil rights. We oppose the federal administration's service ban on transgender people. This unfairly targets loyal, dedicated Americans who willingly will put their lives on the line to serve and protect this country. Now, I want to speak about people who are living with HIV and AIDS, what is also known by the acronym PLWHA. The treatment and prevention of HIV and AIDS has revolutionized since its first discovery as a deadly disease that disproportionately affected gay men in the early 1980s. From the first cases of AIDS to the discovery of the AIDS virus to the development of the first antiretrovirals, HIV and AIDS used to be a death sentence. But current treatment methods have made HIV more manageable than diabetes. New antiretrovirals suppress the reproduction of the virus, where it is literally undetectable in the blood. Alongside this, a new prevention method has been developed based on HIV medications. Both, when properly maintained, make it virtually impossible to transmit the virus. We do not have a cure or a vaccine, but we do have the next best thing. If we can make sure that all PLWHA become undetectable and help them stay that way, we could effectively eradicate the virus in a generation. It should not be forgotten that PLWHA have long suffered stigma. Public ignorance, political opposition, and homophobia have stereotyped people living with HIV and AIDS. And the stigma around HIV and AIDS dissuades many of the most at-risk groups from being tested. Today, the biggest factor in the transmission of HIV is not the people who know they have it, it is the people who don't know they have it. Well, these miracle drugs prevent and treat HIV, promise the possibility of beating this 40-year epidemic. Infection rates are still on the rise. And these infection rates disproportionately affect people of color and the economically disadvantaged. Tara Samples and I commit to protecting and supporting Ohioans who are living with HIV and AIDS. We support treatment as prevention and all efforts to make sure that people living with AIDS and HIV have access to and are compliant with the vital health care they need to stay healthy. The CDC has recently declared that it is virtually impossible for a person with HIV who is sero undetectable to infect anyone who is uninfected. It's rated 94% effective. The 6% donut hole is a compliance issue. We support pre-exposure prophylaxis as a preventive method for stopping the transmission of HIV. It has been noted to be over 99% effective when used properly. We especially promote pre-exposure prophylaxis and programs that support communities of color and the economically disadvantaged groups who are at the highest risk of infection and are least likely to have access to health care and are more likely to have compliance issues. We support the repeal of intentional infection laws in Ohio. We support making sure that all people living with HIV and AIDS in Ohio are properly supported and that their financial as well as their health care needs are met. In our current health care structure, treatment for HIV and AIDS can be prohibitively expensive.
Yes, it is.
This is a public health risk, and it behooves us to make sure that people living with HIV and AIDS are treated and remain healthy to lessen that risk. And I want to add that Matthias Dedamore and I actually worked for State Issue 2 that was about driving down the cost of drugs, that the state can and should be negotiating with these drug companies to reduce the cost so that it makes the drugs more readily available. So Matthias, thank you for your work on that issue. We support restoring the income cap for the Ohio Drug Assistance Program, funded by the federal Ryan White funds, to 500% of the federal poverty line. When it was reduced to 300%, with pressure to go as low as 100% in 2008 in response to economic recession, thousands of people living with HIV and AIDS were thrown off the vital financial assistance program. A 300% cap for 2018 is $36,000. Without assistance, people living with AIDS and HIV in Ohio have to make over $50,000 to break even with the income cap. That's not acceptable. This sets an unfairly low glass ceiling for Ohioans living with HIV and AIDS. We support instituting diminishing benefits above the 500% income cap so that economic mobility does not become a liability, where a promotion does not equal an effective demotion. So this plan and program that I have articulated will be guiding principles of our administration, will be the beginning of establishing a new relationship between state government and the LGBTQ community, will establish a standard in Ohio where leaders will set a higher tone, where leaders will stand for inclusiveness, where leaders will stand for diversity, where leaders will stand for tolerance, where leaders will stand for compassion, where leaders will bring all of us together as Ohioans. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. And at this point, again, I want to thank Matthias Dedamore for his wise and informed counsel in helping us to expand our program and platform, and to thank Tara Samples for her partnership as we move to let the people of Ohio know that we're ready to bring transformative leadership, that we're ready not only to shake up the status quo and old thinking, but to share with the people of Ohio a path forward that can be joyful, fearless, courageous, and wise. So with this, I welcome any questions or comments that you may have. We have a number of community leaders here, and I want to acknowledge my deep respect for the journey that each person has taken to this moment. Thank you very much. So may